I could murder you right now and no one would ever know.
Yeesh. Okay. Awkward. Remind me never to try to make small talk with Elizabeth Moss. It does not seem that it will go well. Hi, I'm Cinematic Psychology, and this is my first video. So, welcome to my channel. Wish me luck. Hopefully, it'll go well. My goal for this channel, and this has been something that I've dreamed of doing for a very long time, is to kind of do some analysis and reviews on films that have a lot of deep psychological content. So, definitely not really the Transformers kind, but things that maybe go into the character's psyches a little deeper, preferably films that kind of go into the dark side of human nature, and I do kind of gravitate towards female centered films. So, if you have any suggestions to help me build my channel, I would really appreciate it. I don't shy away from horror, and yeah, so wish me luck. And this is my first review, and it is on the indie gem Queen of Earth. So, Queen of Earth is a really interesting movie, and it's definitely one that you have to pay attention to and you have to think about very critically to really engage with it on a proper level. The first time I saw this movie, I was 23. It was back in 2015, and I saw it in the IFC theater in New York City. I think it was some sort of special event because Elizabeth Moss actually came out to talk about the film herself and give some sort of insight on it. And I remember when I first saw the film for the first time, yeah, I wasn't really terribly impressed. My main takeaway was, wow, all those characters are awful people. I'm glad I don't know them. And I kind of didn't really think about it again until probably last night. And the second time I watched it, I definitely appreciated it more. I still kind of left with a sort of 7 out of 10 feeling like it had a lot of promise, but it wasn't perfect. But as I decided to make this video for you, I started to appreciate the film even further. It's one of those films that the more you think about, the more you appreciate. So I think the best part about this film was the casting. I mean, the acting is absolutely fantastic. There are three main characters. We have, and if I pronounce these people's names wrong, forgive me. So there's Catherine Waterston, and she plays Ginny. Elizabeth Moss as Catherine, and Patrick Fugit, maybe, as Rich. So these are the three main characters in this really kind of claustrophobic sort of cabin in the middle of nowhere kind of setting. And the acting on all three of their parts is absolutely fantastic. I really have to say, especially with Elizabeth Moss. I'm a general fan of Elizabeth Moss. I think that she's a really good actress in everything that she does. I don't think she really gets typecast. I think she can really bring out the character and whatever she's planted in. And I really appreciate the choice for Elizabeth Moss in this role because this is very much a women falling into madness kind of film. And in the past, when you see this, you really often see the director casting an extremely glamorous woman as the person who falls into madness. Like in Repulsion, you have Catherine Deneuve, Kristen Dunst in Melancholia, Natalie Portman in Black Swan, and even in May, we have Angela Bettis, who's supposed to be like the girl next door, but is like a total knockout. Whereas, like, you know, Elizabeth Moss, she's a normal looking person. She doesn't rely on the halo effect. And if you're not familiar with the halo effect, it's the psychological effect of when you see an attractive person, you're more likely to sympathize with them and associate positive qualities to them. So with her character, we don't have that sort of instinct to protect her or sympathize with her or idealize her in the same way that we might in Repulsion or Black Swan. We see a real person, someone who, like, when I think of Elizabeth Moss, I think of like the bossy girl you get paired with in a group project. And that leaves you kind of looking at her character the way you would look at somebody that you actually know. And Sometimes you look at her throughout this film in disgust through her actions.
No, I hate you, you dishonest snake.
I'm not looking for you to understand me here.
Well, good, because there's no chance of that happening.
I just think that you've been misdirecting a lot of anger towards me the past few months, and I can't take it
Oh.
anymore.
Oh, good for you. I'm glad that you figured that out. Good.
Sometimes you look at her through sympathy because you can really empathize with her, but it's all because of her. She carries it. And I really think she really carries the entire film. So she is just fantastic. So no offense. I mean, absolutely no offense whatsoever, but she's really good. So the basic story of Queen of Earth is, and remember, plenty of spoilers ahead. So Catherine, who's played by Elizabeth Moss, she's falling into a really deep depression. Her father had recently committed suicide, and on top of that, her boyfriend cheated on her and dumped her. So her life is a hot mess, and she is all over the place. So she tries to kind of recoup and get a hold of herself by going to this lake house in this beautiful place. And her best friend, Ginny, who's been her best friend since childhood, since who knows how long, she comes and joins her. And the idea is that Ginny is going to comfort Catherine and help her through this hard time. If you've seen the trailer, you know that this is not how it works out. So Ginny, however, she has a sort of underlying resentment for Catherine because last year it was sort of the exact opposite. Ginny was very depressed, and Catherine went to the cabin with Ginny, and Catherine brought her boyfriend along with her, and they weren't terribly sympathetic to Ginny. We never really know what happened to Ginny. They don't might quite make that clear, but we do realize that Ginny felt neglected and talked down to by the both of them. So this resentment, along with some very core differences that we're going to discuss later, really causes this tension. And the tension is the core conflict of the film. And the tension is really personified with this character, Rich, who is sort of like Ginny's casual hookup throughout the film. The relationship's not totally explained, but he really just takes every turn to put down Catherine. He really wants to put her in her place. And as the film goes on, his presence becomes more and more strong. And so basically, all these elements kind of create this really intimate relational horror story where there's no monster, there's no murders, it's just the horror of people being together. And it is pretty interesting. So, with that, I want to kind of talk about each of these three characters together and kind of analyze them all in their own way. So Catherine, our main character, the first thing I thought of when I thought of Catherine was an anxious, ambivalent, anxious, ambivalent attachment style. So she's really afraid of abandonment, and it kind of colorizes her entire view of the situation.
I'm sorry. Please don't remember me. Just don't leave me, okay? Ginny, I promise I'll get back. I promise.
And she's very, very, very codependent. You can see that with the way she talks about her father and the way she talks about her ex-boyfriend. So her father was like this really big, famous artist. And while he was alive, Catherine was just totally content with working for him. She never tried to build her own career. She just kind of followed in her father's footsteps. And she was comfortable with that. She didn't really think much more about that, but everyone else had something to say about that. And then you see her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. And that was a sort of relationship that's very, very characteristic of the anxious, ambivalent attachment style, in which she was constantly trying to grab him and keep him.
Then a few more months passed, and he started to get distant again. And I was planning weekend trips and introducing him to my friends and just trying to really integrate him into my life. And then I realized, 2-3 days were passing where I wasn't hearing from him, and it hit me that he was doing it again. He was doing the exact same thing that he did before. And
he was always kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, the way that their relationship was described. And her entire goal was, how do I keep this guy with me? And when he finally left, she was just shattered. And you can also see this sort of attachment style with Ginny throughout the film, you know, no matter what Ginny says, and she says some terrible stuff.
I thought you had it all figured out. But you were just surrounding yourself with men. With James, with your father. They took care of you. Without them, here you are.
Catherine wants Ginny. She doesn't leave until like the very, very end. She just kind of puts up with it. And that is kind of hard sometimes to wrap my head around. You really kind of want to know more about why are they so attached to each other. And even Ginny wasn't really Catherine's independently made friend, because Catherine doesn't really do anything independently. Because she met Ginny because Ginny's father was friends with Catherine's father. So maybe perhaps Ginny is a part of Catherine's father that she's trying to keep, part of her childhood, or part of her innocence. I'm not really sure. But basically, before she lost her father, before her boyfriend just ditched her, Catherine was really content and really smug. She didn't really introspect much on who she is, what she wants. She just kind of was happy with it. And at the time in the flashbacks, there are a lot of flashbacks in the film, she talks down to Ginny.
Well, relaxing or having a vacation would imply that at some point it might end. So you can't really get away from it all if that's all you're doing, you know? Then you're just a bum. Are you a bum, Ginny?
Ginny's depressed, and Catherine's like, why don't you get a job? Why don't you do anything? And Ginny is just like, what? I mean, I want a friend here. Don't talk to me like that. And that kind of is something that ruptured the friendship. And she definitely gets her karma, and she gets it hard when she gets depressed. And I think that her character arc, I think my interpretation of the ending is I think she wins in the end. I think she kind of conquers that sort of codependent side of her, because she does eventually leave Ginny. And the ending is really ambiguous. What happens to her after she leaves Ginny? Can she stand on her own? She doesn't know, and neither do we. Okay, so then we got Ginny. So when I see Ginny, my first instinct is I just hate her so much, because the things that she does are just so cruel and sadistic. It's really hard to understand how anybody could treat someone like that. But I've tried to understand her, try to see what the writers are going for with this character. And on the flip side of Catherine's anxious, ambivalent attachment, I kind of see Ginny as an avoidant attachment. You know, she talks about how if anybody causes her pain, she just has to cut her out.
Horrible to feel. I wish I didn't feel it. I wish I could have relationships with some people who I can't, but once they become just ciphers or, you know, energy drains, or they become someone who distracts or depresses me, I have to have nothing to do with them. I can't help it.
You can help it.
That's just hallmark avoidant. And I think that's kind of something that's always been Ginny. She wants to keep things casual, like the way she talks about her ex-boyfriends. You know, she doesn't really have a lot of emotional investment. The way she talks about the child that she gave up for adoption, maybe, I'm not sure. Very much like, if you don't make me happy, I don't care about you kind of thing. She seems to kind of lack empathy. One way that's really kind of subtly made clear is there's this 8-minute scene where the two girls are talking in bed. And Catherine's talking about her ex-boyfriend, and she's talking about how she was always clinging on to him, and how he strung her along, and how it hurt her when James dumped her. And, you know, talking about what it felt like to, you know, kind of be the loser in love. So the film does a good job of kind of zooming in on their facial expressions to kind of see that Ginny's not totally listening. She's kind of zoning out. And Ginny follows up about the story about kind of the opposite, where there was this guy who was so obsessed with her and couldn't get her out of his mind, and she just felt so smothered. And then she like tried to loosely tie her story to Catherine's.
Him pisses me off so much because I can see now what he is, which is this delusional, desperate man, and god damn it, that is so unattractive. So my point is, you can get out of someone else's cycle, but you can't get out of your own. You were victimized by his handwritten note, and I was victimized by his inability to face reality.
We've all kind of had conversations like that, where we're trying to connect with somebody and they're not really getting it, or they don't even try. That being said, I don't think she's a total monster. I think she is torn, because I think she does deeply love Catherine, but Catherine has become a burden to her, and I don't know if Ginny has the emotional capacity to handle that. And she also has this lingering resentment because Catherine wasn't really there for her in the flashback.
I know you've been going through a hard time, and I just wanted to apologize if I really wasn't there for you.
Well, maybe someday you'll be going through this shit and I won't be there for you, and then we'll be even.
God, I hope so.
We never really know what was wrong in the flashback. There's kind of hints about an adoption that she went through or something, but we don't really know. And I think that's kind of a part of her character. She even keeps the audience at a distance. Like, not even the audience is allowed to know what was wrong. But we do know that she's angry at Catherine because Catherine wasn't there for her. And maybe Ginny isn't, psychologically capable of that kind of forgiveness, but she wants to because Catherine is as vulnerable can be. And I think Ginny ultimately loses Catherine. And when that happens, she is devastated by it, which you can see by the way she reacts when she saw that Catherine leaves. And the final character, a really, really interesting character, is Rich. Now, I could make an argument that Rich is not even a real person. I mean, you could easily kind of do a surprise twist that he never existed. I don't think that that's what the director was going for or what was happening, but he's that hollow of a character in and of himself that is totally possible, because he doesn't really serve a purpose outside of Ginny and Catherine's relationship, and he's really a symbol of the rift between them, and it's really done very well how he kind of symbolizes that rift. So Rich appears immediately after Ginny and Catherine's first fight. Like, as soon as Ginny is starting to question her friendship with Catherine, bam, there's Rich.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Guys, this is Rich.
She's making out with him, all over him. And as soon as we see him, that's when we see Ginny's sort of sadistic side come out at Catherine, and we see this really big, nasty blowout. And James, Catherine's boyfriend at the time in the flashback, he's also there. So Rich and James are there, and they're watching the fight. And Rich is just smiling like a demon, and James is acting like a normal person would in this situation, and he's just like super, super uncomfortable.
See, Catherine is this great artist, but she's hiding in her father's shadow, afraid to break out on her own.
Thank you. But it is responsible work, and I very much enjoy doing it.
She's basically his assistant.
Well, I don't see that there's anything wrong with being an assistant to one of our great living artists.
And how...
So then, after Catherine and Ginny split off, after having this giant blowout, and Ginny walks away with Rich, and they are talking, and she says, "You ask so little of me."
I'm sorry about that. I thought they were going to be gone all night.
That's fine. I'm interested.
How so?
To meet her after hearing you talk about her.
You think I'm a horrible friend?
I don't know that I can really answer that. You're always very sweet to me.
You ask so little of me.
Sure you don't want to come in?
I should get back.
All right, well, door's always open.
You ask so little of me. It's like Catherine asks so much because she demands this intense, kind of sucking intimacy. Rich doesn't, because Rich is leaving Catherine. Rich is the freedom of being alone. And he invites her in, and she chooses Catherine at the time, but he says the door is always open. And to me, this seemed like temptation to abandon Catherine, which would be so easy. This weight that would just be lifted off her shoulders is always an option. It's sort of like that expression: opportunity knocks, but temptation leans. And in this situation where Catherine is, vulnerable, needy, going out of her mind even more and more as the film goes on, it's the easy way out. And it would be a source of calm and relief for Ginny. But for Catherine and her codependent tendencies, this is like death. This is like the worst thing that could happen. She lost her husband, not her husband, her boyfriend. She lost her father. She can't lose her best friend. So as the two of them, their friendship gets worse and worse, Rich starts showing up more and more and more often. And by the end of the film, Rich, I feel, has become larger than just Ginny and Catherine to Catherine, because he is so dangerous to her. Being abandoned is so dangerous to her that his voice starts to take over her own self-hatred.
You were a rich, spoiled brat. You grew up in a bubble, and when that bubble popped, you expected everybody to be around to feel sorry for you.
I thought I just wanted to be left alone.
No, you didn't. You wanted to make a spectacle of yourself. Yeah.
But you don't really know me.
Don't know. You were a stuck-up brat last year. And you're a stuck-up brat this year, too. So... you will never be your father. You know that? You were never going to be. In fact, I'm convinced if you weren't related to him, you probably wouldn't have gotten close to him.
Right. So in this end scene, we see her embrace Rich, and it seems like it's almost romantic. Like the way she's hugging him, like it's almost sexual. And then she's sort of weakly trying to strangle him, but in the end, he kind of pushes her on the ground.
Cat? What are you doing? Stop. Stop it. Okay. All right. Cat, stop it. What are you doing?
Ground. And to me, that's kind of like the struggle of how people feel about their own depression. Like they embrace it, but they try to fight it, but in the end, it overpowers them. And that's kind of how I saw this interaction. So it was definitely like a really interesting film, and I've seen other people review this film, and they always make the comparison to The Yellow Wallpaper. And I have to say, this is not The Yellow Wallpaper. Films like Safe, Swallow, Antichrist, those are The Yellow Wallpaper. This is not, because the central focus of this film is not the power imbalance between men and women within a romantic relationship. So Catherine's codependency on men is explored, but it's not presented as social commentary on exploitative gender norms, but it's more like Catherine's personal failing because she can't be independent on her own. In fact, it's sort of almost like the opposite of The Yellow Wallpaper in the fact that Catherine's failing to live up to the standards of a modern woman. She's not trapped by her society, but she's not meeting modern society's expectations. So she's not a victim of the patriarchy by any means. So this is not The Yellow Wallpaper. I think a better comparison, if we're going back to our high school English class, would be No Exit by Sartre. Because the central theme comes from the pain and disappointment that comes from a level of intimacy. It kind of has that sort of hell is other people quality to it, along with the claustrophobia. And there is a real sense of purgatory about this film. Like, Ginny goes to the film when she's depressed. Catherine goes when she's depressed to this cabin. It's like this cabin sort of represents this weird, dark waiting room people go to recover from their trauma, whatever it is, whether they can or they can't. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely more no exity. In fact, this might be a stretch, but I almost saw an allusion to no exit in the scene where Rich and Ginny are in bed and Catherine comes in.
Definitely.
Because this reminds me of in No Exit, Estelle and Joseph when they kiss in front of Inez. And also, Estelle, she killed her baby. Ginny gave her baby up for adoption. Maybe they're trying to make some sort of parallel between Ginny and Estelle. Third wheeling, man. It sucks. Okay, so my overall review of this film, I really thought it had a lot of strengths. The acting was really great all along. I think one way for me to know if a film has good acting is if I stop thinking about the acting and think about the characters, and that's definitely what happened. And another way I know a film is good is if the characters' names stick in my head, because that's kind of like how I know they became real people to me. And that definitely happened here. And the tension was really, really strong, and it really felt realistic. Like, it just, you know how it feels to be around people who are fighting like that. You can kind of feel it yourself. And the drama was all harvested based on interpersonal dynamics, which was really impressive. The thing I really loved about this film is it didn't go on the cliche of the person falling into madness and ending up killing someone. Well, I don't know. Maybe Catherine killed that guy. You never really know. That was kind of weirdly just thrown in there. But like that wasn't the climax. The climax, if it was a more cliche movie, would she murdered Ginny or she murdered Rich, but that didn't happen, and I appreciated that. And I also like that there's just so much subtext to interpret. Like I said, the more you dig into it, the more you like it. But there still were flaws. One thing was it just didn't seem like there was much at stake here. I mean, I guess the greatest risk would be Catherine and Ginny stop being friends, but we don't really see them at their best. We just see them at their worst. And it's like, what are these people holding on to? You know, like it was just really hard for me to understand what motivated them to stay together. And sometimes Ginny was just so cartoonishly cruel. I couldn't believe it. It's like, why would anyone say that to their best friend when their best friend is going through this kind of thing? It just it seemed like it was too much. Too much to feel real. Like Hannibal Lecter stuff, you know? And I don't think Ginny was supposed to be a sociopath because, you know, she obviously showed like a little glimmer of caring for Catherine here and there. So I think like the film would be better if it was like 65% tension and cruelty, but 35%, you know, them being cute friends bonding, because I wanted to care more about their friendship and understand them more. But instead, I just felt like you only saw like tiny little flashes of affection, like maybe 5%, but 95% they were just cutting at each other. Like, I watched another review for this film that said, and these were like two guys who were talking about the film, and they're like, is this how women are to each other? Like, is that how women interact? No. No. Women do not say Hannibal Lecter terrible things to their friend whose father just killed himself. That's not a thing. If it is, that person's abusive and psychotic, and you should run away from them. And the fact that they kind of took that away from the film is a shame. So overall, I'd say I gave this film either like a B plus, A minus. It was very good. Some things I still don't understand. A few things. One, why is the movie called Queen of Earth? I'm trying to figure it out. I can't really get it. Two, so like what happened to that homeless guy that she said she was gonna murder? Was that a thing? I don't know. Maybe that was just thrown in there to kind of create this sort of like ambiguity, like what's going on kind of thing. If you have any thoughts on that, let me know. And three, the portrait. The portrait that they were working on. You know, it shows kind of this sort of zombie-like blue with a red splash of Ginny. I don't really know what the director was trying to say with that portrait. If you have thoughts on that, leave them in the comments. And yep, so that's my takeaway.
You are weak and greedy and selfish, and you are the root of every problem. You are why people betray one another. You are why there is nowhere safe or happy anymore. You are why depression exists. You are why there is no escape from indecency and gossip and lies. You, Rich, you are why